No mai haere mai. Welcome to Farmers in the Field, where our Earthworker alumni share their regenerative organic horticulture projects. Join us in co-learning through these biology-first conversations and growing radical hope through food. You can hear about our mentors in episode 1. Come join us.
Kia ora, my name is Britta and I'm a farmer at Tāmaki Urban Market Garden, and we're here today to introduce you to the market garden and what we're doing. As you see, here's a picture of it right behind us. We're based out in Glen Innes in East Auckland, and we've been going since the beginning of 2021. So I'll pass you on to Lucy, who's going to talk about some of our history to start with.
Thanks, Britta. Kia ora koutou, ko Lucy tōku ingoa. I've lived in Glen Innes now for nearly 24 years, and I'm really getting into the idea of building a regenerative system around urban farms, and had the opportunity by talking to my local doctors of having some land to play with. So we'll go straight into the slideshow and show you what's what. Following a time of working with For the Love of Bees and being very inspired by what was happening at OMG, I took some time out from a permanent job to learn a little bit more about how to really take action around climate change. And in that time, I befriended my local GPs, and they said they had this land available. So we managed to make use of the land from 2020, the end of 2020, and started in, this is what it looked like at the start of February 2021. And I did the Earthworkers course because I was so impressed by what had been achieved at OMG and what could be done in other urban small spaces, and wanting to try and replicate that. So a little bit around food security, but actually growing great food in small spaces so that it's available locally. So this is the site as it started. There's this fabulous big magnolia tree there, which sort of gives us a little bit of a challenge around shade and also taking water from the soil, but we also have a nice gradient, nice gentle gradient. So the first thing I did was actually installed some rainwater tanks through a local board grant, Love Your Neighbourhood, and then started to put things into the ground. And it was quite a scary start, just breaking into a field or a place of just kikuyu grass. And Levi had said, just do something. So I put down a load of cardboard and I made a start, and that didn't work. So that was my very first bed in March, and the cardboard actually was not that conducive. And then on another discussion with Levi, realized that you don't actually need to put down the card, because if it's blocking the kikuyu growing up, it's going to stop the roots going down. So all the subsequent beds have just been cut down to as number 1 cut with a lawnmower, and then layered with some leaves and carbon matter, and then soil or compost. And the soil has come through either donations from local building sites of topsoil, or it's come through, or we've ordered it in from Dalton's, depending on what money we've got available. And just a little sort of progression of some of the activities we've done, over time. That's in May, we sort of grew a fellow earthworker, Sarah, had grown a load of seedlings for me, and she came and helped me install them. By July, we had quite a bit, starting to look a little bit like a farm. And by August, we had our very first produce that I was willing to share and felt I had in the quantity to share it. This was right in the middle of lockdown last year. And so all those boxes, each week I took a similar amount twice a week to a local church that were distributing food during lockdown. One of the objectives of the farm was to keep it beautiful and also to make it attractive to all our lovely insects. And so the edges had been sprayed within an inch of their lives. And so I just planted those up with wildflowers and a few little onions and sort of random things that people gave to me. And so this is sort of some of our carbon and our flower crops that we've tried to grow within breaking the ground first. My fairly early guild was from, again, we had to rely on donated produce or seeds. A lot came from Poriwa out on Kepa Road from Ngāti Whātua, and a lot came from just people who said, oh, you're growing something, let me give you some seeds or some plants. So I was very sort of beholden to whatever was donated to create a bed. Tried to plant a lot of beans because I could do those from seed, and radishes and carrots, and then a lot of brassicas came through and lettuces. So that's kind of my early guilds. And come October, November time, I decided that it was time to try and be a proper CSA and not just be donating food. I continued to do donations, but also actually started to create some boxes, which are, as you see here. I don't know if you actually see them because of the Zoom that's in the way. And then I got the funding to, I applied for some funding because I felt like it was a proper going concern. Those first boxes were just on Koha, just a notice put up on Facebook, would anyone like some vegetables, first come, first served, and people just gave me what they wanted for them. By the end of the year, it was feeling like this was a serious project, and so I have achieved some funding through the Regional Environment Natural Heritage Fund through Auckland Council to install a tunnel house, and also to pay for some more earthworkers to do some capacity building within the community. And Tāmaki Regeneration also helped with that. And so ended up building a team with Britta and Danny and Cindy, who all did the Earthworkers course and now are actually very effectively managing and running the system. So I'll hand over to Britta now to show you what's happening now and what they gained from doing Earthworkers.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, so you can see that this is the garden as it is at the moment. So spring 2022, it's looking very beautiful. We've got 12 beds in, give or take, and we've got about 100 square meters of growing space. And we're looking at the moment to make that work as efficiently as possible. And yeah, we're very lucky to be able to be funded to have 2 paid farmers. So myself and the other wonderful farmer, Danny, we both work part-time at the garden, and our focus at the moment has been like learning from the Earthworkers course and putting some of those things into action. So we're very lucky, we've learned a lot very quickly through Earthworkers, and at the moment our big focus has been getting more of our CSA boxes every week, and having systems for our planting that make that possible, basically. So working on our guilds and things. And here's some pictures of some of the vegetables that we're really proud of. And in the next slide, we've got some pictures of some of the guilds that we've been working on. So some of the things that we've put in recently. On the left, there's a beautiful winter guild with some broccoli, some coriander, some leeks, some lettuces, some radish. And that was a big learning experience. We planned that through the Earthworkers course in May 2022, and it's really shown us some things. We've been loving the broccoli at the moment. It's really shown us how long leeks take to come through, and we've just started a couple more guilds from our new seedlings. This one on the left, you've got peas, carrots, brassicas, beets, spring onions, lettuce, and rocket all in that bed there. And as we grow, we're taking over more and more of our beds by having these really carefully planned guilds and trying to get the growing really diverse and really efficient. So in terms of and here's an example of our CSA boxes. At the moment, we have 10 subscribers, and we do it on a monthly basis, and they all come up and pick their vegetables up and take it away in their bags, and we love our subscribers. And we're just wanting to get more and more of those coming through. The big next step for us is to have our seedling production really going. So far we've been quite reliant on having donations or members of our community growing seedlings for us or growing them in our own places. And our next step, in order to be able to have our really efficient guilds and have those carefully planned and be putting those in the ground at the right times, we need to have a space to grow our seedlings in. So one of the things that we're bringing to this mentorship is looking at where we put our tunnel house and what size tunnel house we have. And I think you'll see more about that soon. But yeah, so here are a few pictures of different things that have been going on. One thing that's been really important to us throughout the whole journey has been being connected with our community. We've had a really wonderful support from our volunteers who've done things like build our workbenches, grow our seedlings, come along to our working bees on weekday evenings. And we're really wanting to make our CSA work in a way that suits our community's needs. So when we first set it up, we sent out a survey asking people what they could afford, what kinds of things they wanted to get in their boxes. And as we go along, and we have a community with a really diverse set of needs. Some people can afford more, some people can afford less, and we're wanting to make it work so that we can get as much produce out to people in a way that works for them. So we're really excited to be growing our production and getting the advice from Earthworkers on how to do that. So thank you so much. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Welcome to Tāmaki Urban Market Garden.
We call ourselves TUMG, TUMG, and I'm Lucy.
I'm Britta.
And we've got Danny who's working. You might see a little bit of her in a little bit. I did the Earthworkers 1.5 years ago, the first rendition, and the main thing I gained from it was understanding how to set up a CSA, which is what inspired this to start, and that idea around sequencing plants and incredible density of growing and the diversity of plants that you need and the importance that creates in the sort of the whole world underneath the soil. So it's like this little city happening underneath, which really I find very exciting. And then a couple of years later, Britta, you did the course.
Yeah, and what I learned from Earthworkers was just, the biggest thing was a huge sense of kind of inspiration and aspiration for what is really possible in terms of producing all of this food and doing it in a way that's not compromising the biology and is actually supporting the soil at the same time. I found that hugely exciting, and just, what can be possible in a space like this. And also really, really great practical advice on the creative planning process of putting together guilds, growing these diverse species all together, and just the joy that comes out of that process.
Yeah, and the process of actually going from seed to harvest and knowing what to do in order to get a whole series of CSA boxes. It's actually quite a process to do, and so we gained that as well.
Yeah, since Jenny and I did the Earthworkers, we've put a bit of work into planning guilds, and if you can pan around to a couple of ones that have recently gone in the ground, all of our species, just down on this lower part of the garden, and we're really excited to see how they grow and learn from them in the future.
So in those guilds, we've got peas and lettuces and rocket and spring onions and
carrots.
Yep, and lots of brassicas. Probably the last of our brassicas growing in for this season, because last summer we just got invaded by whiteflies, so we decided that maybe we won't try and grow summer brassicas quite so much, is my thinking. But Daniel, you can correct us if we're wrong.
In certain parts of the country, you can, in cooler regions, I guess, and in certain locations, you can grow brassicas sort of more year-round without that sort of increased, pest level. But if you're really struggling for insects, particularly like whitefly, it's usually, basically it's solely responsible because you haven't got the bricks of the plants up high enough to discourage that insect infestation. And sometimes in those really warm summer months, and this is where timing again becomes a critical thing, is that in your location that just might create a problem where you're just going to attract insects into a garden because you simply can't grow. Brassicas are just simply not happy enough growing in your situation, in your location at that time of the year to maintain a bricks. That is actually going to discourage insects. So it's a sure sign that the plants are not as good as they need to be. And that's often I used to find, particularly in Auckland, when you get to January and February, often that was the hardest time of the year to grow anything. Interesting enough, because the sun is so intense, it gets so hot. relatively humid conditions as well. You're just better to focus on the things that actually are happy growing at that time of the year than trying to battle away with growing something that just simply really doesn't want to grow. That's the key. It's just simple growing, really, other than the fact, obviously, we're looking at managing bricks as high as possible to discourage insects naturally, which is infinitely possible, but it becomes extremely difficult to do if you're growing a species of plants at a time of the year or in a location that is wrong for that crop.
What I found, Daniel, was we had a lot of leaf growth over the summer, but not particularly any flowers. No florets really came out, and so the insects really were more effort than they were worth, really.
Yeah.
Than they were worth.
Yeah, I mean, when plants get excessively warm, you will get you can get a lot of vegetative growth. And there are brassicas that really are designed, especially in Auckland, to grow in winter, and will grow extremely well in winter if you get the timing right in terms of their planting. And trying to grow the same thing later on in the year, in the height of summer, is just something you kind of find that really there are just easier things to grow. There's stuff that loves those conditions, and at the end of the day, again, it's about learning what to plant when, and realizing that that those summer months, usually everything grows really easy up to Christmas, and then January, February, everything sort of starts to struggle. Unless it's things like corn or and there's various other species you could plant. I mean, even salad crops and those sort of things, lettuce, they usually don't have too much of an issue, but the wrong species will bolt in the heat. So you've got to have the right varieties of lettuce, some varieties, because the traditional things like iceberg will just bolt and go to flower before you get ahead. So that's a matter of understanding those sorts of things. I mean, tomatoes love that sort of condition, and they're usually in there. They really hit their straps in that midsummer. They start producing huge amounts of, fruit, essentially. So just a matter of learning those things, and everywhere is it can be a little bit different, but you can obviously try the other aspect of using. If you're monitoring your bricks, or you're if you've got whitefly, upping the foliar component in the program, to try and increase the bricks. You can discourage them that way. If you can get the bricks high enough, you will get over the whitefly problem. But that's always sometimes more effort than it's worth than planting something that they just don't like.
So the next question is about our seedling.
What we're thinking for our seedlings, one thing we're struggling with the succession of plants is having enough space and enough covered space, particularly over the winter time, to grow seedlings and be able to plant something in each week. So I did get some funding to build a tunnel house, and I've sort of come to a standstill on it because we're a bit concerned about where to place it. This area here is our flattest section, but as you can probably tell, there's an enormous tree around it, or above it, sorry. And we're just not sure whether it's a good spot or not, or whether we should be going off-site and having something like a cold frame, or just really what's the best way for us to get our seedlings up and going. At the moment, we're very reliant on community people to grow seedlings for us, or donations. We do get donations through various organisations, but it doesn't allow us to plan our guilds properly. We're just, when we're just getting donations.
Okay. So the tree that you're standing underneath obviously is evergreen. I can't quite determine what it is.
Magnolia. It's massive.
Magnolia grandiflora. Yeah, so very dense canopy as well, so it doesn't really let through light. Yep, no, the plant well. Had those in gardens before myself. So fantastic tree, apart from the fact that it blocks everything all year round. I guess the question is, when you turned around to the other site where you thought you might put the greenhouse, which is what you're standing in front of that's in front of you at the moment.
Yeah.
Is that there did seem to be light. I mean, what I see is sunlight. So how much of the day is that spot that we're looking at the moment actually does it have light in it, sunlight in it? Because that tree feels like it's to the south of that little space, is it not?
Yes, it is. So north is up here, up there, and the sun goes round that way.
Oh,
so
okay.
From in the summertime it has a lot of sunshine, so I'd be worried about it being too hot. And in the wintertime it probably gets sun from about 10 or 11 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably okay in terms of a site, given the limitations that you have there. Potentially the shade in the summer isn't going to be an issue, because generally what will happen is that you have more trouble with it being excessively hot. So, being in the shade of a tree can be okay. It's just really, it's a little bit difficult to tell from here, just looking at the video camera. But it feels like it's probably not too bad. The thing you've got to try and imagine is also from a seed raising perspective, is that winter is about planting in autumn. And particularly with guilds, the idea that you're trying to do is you're not trying to plant a bed. The guild should last for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, right? So if you've got the right sort of guild, you actually plant it once and you keep harvesting various different crops from it throughout a long period of time. So it's not a case of 60 days and you rip it out and you replant, 60 days and you rip it out, replant, or 90 days or 120 days or whatever, and you just completely rip it out and replant. Is that because you put so many different species in. So the thing to get your winter production right, means basically having quite a lot of stuff coming out in summer, a lot of your summer crops all finishing, and then you're planting, you've got some quick autumn crops, but then you've got some of the beds immediately, probably at around the middle of March, at least, already going into what will actually be crops that will be producing in winter. And by the middle of April, you actually don't want to really be, in some places in the country, that's kind of the cutoff point. If you plant after the middle of April, the plants don't get established well enough to really get any serious growth on, and they kind of hit winter and go into stall mode. If they've got enough growth and they're big enough, they'll simply roar on and carry on, and it won't really matter. They'll just keep growing. You've got to get them to the stage. So timing is that critical factor. So you've got to look at, there'll be months of the year where you don't have stuff in that greenhouse trying to grow seedlings, because that's just impractical. So your greenhouse sitting there trying to grow seedlings for spring, for argument's sake, we're trying to do that at the end of May and June. That's really, as the light is falling and it goes down, you've got about 2 months of the year where you simply shouldn't be trying to grow seedlings in that greenhouse in winter, right? It's just impractical. When you get to the 1st of August and that sort of stuff, all of a sudden it'll kick into gear. There's enough warmth, there's enough light, and anything you put in there will just roar away. But stuff you put in June and July will still be sitting there, and the stuff that you plant on the 1st of August will have caught up to it by the end of August. Right? You haven't gained anything.
House.
What's that?
Do we actually need a tunnel house, or are we better off with like a cold frame?
No, cold frames are used for different purposes. I mean, generally not a big useful thing within the Auckland kind of climate. Just the basic greenhouse. I tend to favour the ones that are covered in a plastic covering, like you have at OMG, which is like we call a hoop house, and it just has a plastic cover on it. So it'll last up. A good one of those will last up to 10 years. They tend to be better than the polycarbonate type greenhouses. In my experience, the polycarbonate breaks down. I've had one break down on me after like only 3 years, and the polycarbonate's rubbish. Right. And it actually gets to the point it's so brittle you can stick your finger through it. So you have to be very careful of the polycarbonate greenhouses. But with a good quality plastic house, from someone like Red Path, for argument's sake, they'll say to you a plastic greenhouse, a little propagation house of any length, 2.5 meters wide, with a plastic cover on it that'll last like 10 years. And you can actually pick the thing up in its complete state without disassembling it. If it's only about 4 meters long, actually pick it up from the ground, so you can pin it to the ground on a plank, on boards, And then if you want to, you can actually basically pick the whole thing up and stick it on a trailer and take it somewhere else, or even move it around the side by simply pinning it down again with like concrete reinforcing rods to hold it to the ground, because they're like a standalone. The structure itself is actually a fixed, structure. You can put it together and move it around.
So that would be my next sort of thought is, what's the optimal size for something, a garden this size? So is that actually quite a good size, that 2 meters?
So they do a standard one. I think they're about 2.5 meters wide. And then they do them, I think, from about 3 meters long. They do like 3 meters and might be 3.6 or 4.2, and they'll go all the way up to whatever. But you're probably looking in that space of 100 square meters being able to grow enough seedlings in their standard propagated house, which is only about 4 meters long.
Right. And could we also grow tomatoes and peppers and things like that in there, or is that not really?
You could, but honestly, you can grow those things outside. And the best crops that I've seen of tomatoes, and it doesn't happen every year because they can sometimes be a little finicky. We've seen really good crops of tomatoes outside, and usually when they start kicking in, so you put them in a greenhouse. You'd want a bigger greenhouse if you're going to try and grow tomatoes and indoor crops. But honestly, you're often only going to gain 3 or 4 weeks at the most from when it starts growing really well inside and producing fruit versus what you've got outside. I've never found an enormous gap. It's like if I plant them outside and plant them inside, 3-4 weeks later, the ones outside are producing fruit like crazy. And you generally can grow them up the middles of beds on raised. You can follow them up a string line in the middle of a bed, that sort of stuff in summer. Putting them in greenhouses, you'd want a bigger greenhouse because they would just completely fill that space, and you can't do that and grow seedlings.
Okay.
Cool. So just to make sure I understood what you were saying before about sunlight, would the general gist of that be that it doesn't matter too much if we don't have a lot of sun during winter because things aren't actually growing?
Well, technically, you're just really going to struggle to produce any sort of seedlings, even if the greenhouse is in full sun. It's still a struggle, and particularly because you've got to get soil temperature up, and you're probably not going to have heated pads or anything like that for power anyway. So it's all much. We work with the seasons, and New Zealand has this pretty much a 2-month winter, and you can grow right up to it. But if you've got plants going really well before it, then really when it comes out in August is that your end of your winter crops are really sort of fading out over that month. And you can, from the beginning of August, you can start planting seedlings, and by the beginning of September, have seedlings out of your greenhouse. So you don't really need that 2 months of winter. Honestly, it's like growing brassicas in summer. Do you know what I mean? It's just hard work. Really hard work. And it's a skill in its own that is challenging, and it's just not really what you're about in terms of producing lots of food.
So first of all, I'd just say it's fantastic to see how far the TUMG farm has come. I want to hats off to you, particularly you, Lucy, for starting this project and getting a team on board that are really committed to it. I just would think that Daniel did such a fantastic job of answering your brassica question, but I just wanted to say again, one of the reasons that that's such a difficult time of year to grow brassicas is not just about the sun, but also around the water. And I would say on your site, watering is, something that you have to really give attention to as you're coming into the summer. And if you don't have enough water for those plants to be able to have those high sugar levels, then again, be designing for, that's where the permaculture principles come in. Design for what you have capacity to deliver on. That's in terms of labor and in terms of your, your opportunities. So water opportunities is something you really need to factor in for.
After having a good look through your site there, my first intuition, obviously without being there, is that your greenhouse is going to probably do quite well underneath that fig tree, the magnolia tree, because in the summer, which is, as Daniel said, is the main time that you're going to be, really cranking out the seedlings, sort of spring through summer, we actually look at putting a shade cloth over our greenhouses anyway during that time. So a living shade of a tree might work out quite nice, and that might also mean that you don't have to sort of put another artificial shade cloth over it. I guess you can manage with your living tree that's there. The other thing was you could come through and do a little bit of pruning on that tree just to give yourself a little bit more light. I'd imagine that if you were wanting to do that, you definitely want to be doing that before you put your plastic roof up rather than after. And yeah, just what Sarah said on the irrigation, you're lucky that you're going downhill. So with 2 impact sprinklers, one on each side of the bed, just pointing downhill, it's really good because water can travel quite far downhill, which is really nice. And yeah, just to re-emphasize what Daniel said, I wouldn't bother keeping that greenhouse to grow crops in the ground. Seedlings are going to give you the most reward in terms of your time and production. And yeah, just really look. One last thing about the brassicas, I normally, once spring comes, I normally don't sow many brassicas. I stick to the sowing of the brassicas in their traditional season, which is kind of from late summer and autumn, early autumn. Plant out all your brassicas then, and then they can grow through autumn and winter, and then once springtime comes, you can switch to other species, because it's good to not just be, they are a massive family, the brassica family, and it's good to not be constantly planting them year round. So for instance, we do for the main 6 months of the year, we're growing mainly beetroots as a root vegetable, and then through sort of winter and spring, it's more radishes. So summer and autumn we're growing beetroots, and then winter and spring at OMG, at least how I had it in terms of my rotations, was I would just phase out the root vegetable component of your turnip or your radish and change that to a beetroot, just because you don't want to be hitting those things sort of all year round.
Yeah, and I also just want to reiterate in terms of that, production of seedlings, and again with your design constraints, is really planning those guilds extremely well. So the thing that can't be oversaid is you need to get those winter guilds in much earlier than you think you do, in order for them to be growing really well for you through winter. And again, be looking at things like leeks. They're just so fantastic that they'll just keep going and going and going in winter.
So our second question was to do with how we have our paths and our beds. So because we have quite clayey soil, it gets really boggy. What we've done is we've put wood chip on our paths. You can see down here. But we also have a sloped site, and that means that the wood chip tends to kind of spread onto the beds down the hill. So to combat that problem, we've put in these borders along our beds. So it's kind of a bit of balancing the cons of having wood chip getting onto the bed, because I'm not sure how much of an impact that has, but I know that having a lot of wood chip on your bed isn't a good thing necessarily. But also the downsides of having to have these slightly taller sides on the beds. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Putting raised sides on the beds tends to kind of upset the water flow, natural water flow, and what you tend to do is trap it on one side or the other half the time. So you either trap it in the path or you trap it in the bed. And it's not, as a general rule, and in a site like that, it's sloping down the hills with lots of natural rain that we get. It's kind of problematic. that's kind of a lot of looking at the moment without actually, sticking my hands in there and finding out what's going on. I can understand why you've done it. Probably one of the things would be over a period of time is that the soil in those beds probably needs to be built up a little bit more. So you probably want a little bit more topsoil in there if you were going to follow this principle. And then as far as what goes on in the middle in terms of clay, getting clay to sort of percolate through is all about getting microbial activity in there. So there's various different things that you can do. The problem with just putting bark down is you kind of create it's full of carbon, and when it breaks down, eventually you just end up with like a soggy mass. It doesn't really, you kind of end up, then you put more bark on top of it to sort of ride on top of the soggy mess underneath it. So it's kind of a temporary solution that doesn't really just long-term means you end up keeping continuously adding bark on top of it. It won't really ever drain away because you haven't really done anything to, correct the problem. I would have a tendency, it was interesting in the last one we just did where they were using straw on those beds instead of bark or wood chip. And that was having a tendency to actually turn the clay more into topsoil because there was a lot of biological activity happening. The straw sort of soaked it up a bit more. You don't end up with a massive amount of carbon. So having something like that potentially is maybe better long term because they were also using BAM to kind of feed the biology and to kind of get that turn that path into something that wasn't a layer of clay with a bit of bark on top of it, but they're trying to actually turn the clay into something that's going to drain. And that's a matter of bringing biological life into it and bringing the microbes and the worms and stuff to do the job. And when you've just got bark, we get lots of fungi, but it's a very slow process that tends to sort of just require more added to it all the time, if that makes any sense. So that's something to look at in terms of what you're going to do there in future. You've got to try a few different things.
We do have a lot of access. We do have access to quite a lot of straw because somebody who keeps guinea pigs brings us all their animal bedding. Would that straw work because it's be full of guinea pigs?
I certainly would try it.
Right.
I certainly would try it in this situation rather than continually adding bark.
Yeah.
I think you find over a period of time that probably will work better for you. In terms of actually turning that soil in between those rows, that clay actually into soil, and you just walk over the top of it and just crunch it back into the ground. And the fact there's got a bit of animal manure and that sort of stuff in it, it's certainly not going to do it any harm. It'll fire it up and it'll bring a bit of nitrogen into it and help that and break that bark down and feed the biology, and hopefully over a period of time that'll improve your drainage in those situations.
Always really excited to talk about paths. I'm sure Daniel's really excited to talk about paths as well, because the first thing I'll say is you put those borders in on the edges, and when I teach people polycropping and we're planning out guilds, there's two lines that we plant seedlings on, and they're hard on the very, very edge of the path. So you string line out your beds and you plant seedlings right to the very end, to the very edges of the beds. So in your case, you'd be planting those seedlings. That's the thing, is that you've got two wooden boards there. So what that means is you're kind of almost losing space, because the idea with planting right on the edges is that your seedling and your plant then grows into the space of the path. So for instance, if you were to do, not that we're in the season for it, but say if you did celery hard up on the edge of that line, then the growth and the foliage is gonna actually go over into that path, because really your success is the best thing that's going to transform your soil is photosynthesis, not mulch or anything like that. That's number one thing, photosynthesis. So if you're looking down from above, ideally we want to have growth so good that when it's after 2 months, 3 months after planting, you're not seeing that path space because your select species are covering that. So I put in a whole lot of edging in at OMG because we're on a slight site as well. And then over the years, I've just kind of removed all of that edging as I put it in because I thought we had to do it in the beginning. What you find, Daniel said that with the raised beds, like if you're filling it up there and you've got your wall of timber and then, you know, sloped like that, if you fill up and you make the soil higher than it is naturally at the bottom, then it's going to dry out really fast, which also makes it more difficult to plant seedlings hard on the edge. But yeah, I totally get why you've done it. And the wood chip, I've definitely done that as well for when it's super boggy and super wet. You've just got something on hand and you don't want to be trudging through the mud and gumboots throughout the winter. It's totally understandable. Yeah, if you do want to continue rolling with the wooden sort of edges, you could do that. The other option as well is to take away the edge on the uphill side, so you just have one edge, almost like a mini retain. That's what we had at OMG, but honestly, as I said, I put them all in, and then over the course of 3.5 years, just sort of selectively removed them all until we got to the point where if you're building a retaining wall and it's only that high, probably don't need a retaining wall, to be honest. Once you get over a foot, then you actually do need to use it, like once the slope starts getting 45 degrees, but even then, yeah, it's all different considerations, hey. But yeah, see how you go with that.
Levi, when did you sense that you could take out the retaining wall?
When did I sense that I could take out the retaining walls? I guess it was when it just started rotting, actually, and then I just pulled them away, and it was like a wonderful breath of fresh air. In some cases, it does mean that the edge of your beds do go down quite steep there. And so what you've got to do is you've just got to make sure that you plant hardy leafy species with roots that are really going to hold onto that soil on the edge. Fennel does a fabulous job of it, so does parsley. Both those things are, I guess, annual or biannual herbaceous herbs. You can plant them super dense on the edge, and then they'll actually hold the bank together because they've both got quite deep tap roots. But yeah, the other thing that we experimented with on the walls that was really quite steep when we took the timber away was we actually we came through and we seeded it with white clover as well, just to have a living cover holding up that wall, because when you are, I guess, farming on more of a slope, there can be the situation where it can get washed away. And also in the case of you do have to be really cautious of this, I guess, when you're trying to establish doing that method. Say you're on a slope and you've put cardboard and then compost down, and it's springtime and we're getting these heavy rain events, and a whole lot of heavy rain comes and you plant your seedlings into the compost, and then the water comes and it just swishes it all away. And as you said, the wood chips move downhill. But really, you've got to think when we're making a garden, it's not the hard infrastructure that we're putting in that's making the garden. What makes the garden is the plants that you're planting in the garden. That's why the garden's called a garden, not, here's a bunch of wooden beds that we've made. What plants are we going to use to hold the slope up is the first question you should be asking.
And I just basically loved everything that Levi said. Very hard to improve on that. I would have to say that one of the other things, I would be slightly cautious with those wooden beds because I've learnt the hard way, having done, raised garden beds, but also used rocks as edging. I mean, my husband's an edge nut, so I'm constantly having to fight the edge. in my own garden, what I've discovered is those edges are fantastic houses for snails.
Yeah.
I mean, they absolutely just love slugs and snails, just love that type of habitat.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're setting yourself up for having many more slugs and snails present than you might want by doing, you know, the strategy that you've got in place at the moment. And again, be just looking at how, but because, you know, again, you're thinking about permaculture, you've got multiple challenges on your site. So you've got a challenge with, you know, water retention and keeping that kind of soil moist in the summer because of your watering strategies. So, you know, how can you reduce the need for as much watering as possible? And those paths, if they're green in the summer, you're going to find that, you know, that gives you huge benefits. So again, putting clover in, it can be tricky to get clover to you know, establish if you've got a lot of blackbirds around and, you know, eating your seeds. So as Levi said, do it in plugs. Get those, and of course, those, if you've got clover in those little paths, you can walk in it. They don't mind being walked on. They're going to be really resilient in you know, heavy weather events, you know, storm events, but they're also nitrogen fixing. So long, and I know that you're dusting your seedlings and mycorrhizal fungi and various fungi as you're establishing the seeds and establishing those seedlings into the beds. So, you know, those microbes can actually work with harvesting the nitrogen nodules on clover. So, you know, that's another massive benefit. I happen to, at my place, use oregano just because it's just gone crazy here, and I continue to essentially allow it to spread like crazy and then just harvest it as I need it. So today, for example, in my own garden, I've used that oregano to keep the garden beds, you know, keep the diversity of sap exudate in the garden beds, but now they're out competing the plants that I want. So I'll be taking those seedlings out and literally putting them in the paths. So you want to be thinking through all of your challenges as opportunities. And again, as Levi says, use plants to solve those problems for you as much as possible. It's just absolutely thrilling to see you guys taking your project as seriously as you are. It's hugely inspirational, and we're just really thrilled that we can use the Farmer in the Field to get onto your site, help you with your questions, and see you get to the next level.
Okay,
Thank you
bye.
so
Thank
much. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Levi, Sarah, Daniel, Catherine.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
If you are inspired to become an earthworker and learn more about regenerative organic horticulture, look up our Earthworkers Programme on our website to register for our upcoming courses. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support us in making more, we welcome donations on our website fortheloveofbees.co.nz. For the Love of Bees is a charitable trust creating a system of self-sustaining urban farms in Aotearoa that cultivate quality food for local people through regenerative organic horticultural practices that heal the ecosystem. Through these sites, we create happier and healthier ecosystems and resilient, connected communities. We also create and share high-quality, accessible educational experiences around what a truly regenerative world looks like. For the Love of Bees aims to become a world-leading example of partnership, regeneration and participation for a thriving collective future. We started in 2016 as an optimistic and love-centred approach to engaging with ecosystem well-being in a time of climate uncertainty.